Hey guys, welcome back to Introduction to Sociology with Dr. John, and today we're going to continue our lecture about formal groups and bureaucracies. Now, how have formal organizations evolved over time? One type of evolution is what we call scientific management, is the application of scientific principles to the operation of a business or a large organization. So the basic idea here is you are refining and improving on the way the work is done. So scientific management may be applied to a factory, for example, to improve the way that people work with machines or with tools to say, okay, they can do it faster if they do it this way, right? Or they could be more comfortable, or there could be other factors involved. It's not just about speed. It may be about safety. It may be about making sure that the product is done properly, right? So they will go in, they will identify a task, and they will identify how people accomplish that task, and then they'll analyze it. So how can we perform this task more efficiently, more quickly, maybe more with more quality, maybe providing better service in some cases, right? In the case of a service job, right? And then they provide incentives for workers to conform to this system. So basically, if they improve the system, there'll be more productivity, and then we can give workers a higher income or maybe a more fulfilling job in some cases. Depends on what the application is. So the idea here is you're improving the processes, and this would apply not just to an individual, but maybe to the operations of an entire group or division. So by reorganizing the paperwork trail, you can make a better product or make the paperwork more efficient. There are also a lot of new challenges. So for example, race and gender, racism, sexism. I mean, these things exist and they have existed, and many organizations run by, for example, white men excluded minorities, excluded women in order to keep advantages for those white men. So when you try to break down a system of exclusion like that, you create a huge barrier, because the organization is going to use its bureaucratic inertia and structure to try to block this change that has actually nothing to do with the bureaucracy. It's just the people in it, right? But at the end of the day, a bureaucracy is made up of people, right? So those people, like I said when I talked about police departments, may use basically corrupt ways of doing things in order to get what they want for themselves. So in some ways, white males, for example, using policies to exclude women and minorities is a form of corruption of the bureaucracy, because that's not what the bureaucracy needs necessarily, it's what they need. So they're using the bureaucracy to benefit themselves. So again, this is sometimes a tendency. As I said, bureaucracies are made up of people, and people may take advantage of that bureaucratic structure for their personal benefits. The role of the bureaucracy, if it works properly, is to try to prevent that. But it's very hard when everybody in the bureaucracy is unified, right? So that means you have to really bang away at it. So it took a long time to get, for example, universities desegregated, or to get women into places where they could work where they were normally excluded, or open up factories and police departments to the recruitment of women and minorities, because of the resistance of the individuals grabbing onto their bureaucratic privileges. Now, other opposition in a way for American organizations is other cultures. So for example, the Japanese certainly have bureaucracies, but they're a bit different, because in Japanese culture you have much more value on cooperation, and one might say organizational loyalty. It's the idea of loyalty to the organization is much stronger, and that means that people in Japan are willing to put up with sometimes lower wages or harder work conditions, at least for a substantial period of time, because they're loyal to the organization. And as long as they believe that that loyalty will be reciprocated, they will stay loyal, right? And so therefore, their organizations may be more efficient in some ways. Some ways it may make them less efficient, but that's an argument for another day. And then there's, of course, changing nature of work. You have today information-based organizations. You have the internet. You have changes. I mean, this happens all the time. For example, newspapers. It used to be every city had 3 or 4 newspapers, some in the morning, some in the afternoon, some in the evening. So you could go out every 3 hours and get a newspaper edition and find out what's been going on, right? But nowadays we don't really need that. We've got the internet, we've got TV, radio has already come and gone, right? Maybe even TV has come and gone. You got the internet. You go on Facebook, you go on Google, you find out instantaneously what's happened. So you don't have, those newspapers are not there anymore, right? Every city will have maybe 1 newspaper, or maybe 2 in the case of a really big city, right? So that's changed the nature of work. It means people who used to work in one way now have to work in another. And of course, people always interpret change negatively because invariably they'll look at the bad side before they see a good side, if there is a good side, right? Sometimes this means we have more autonomy, more creativity. Sometimes it means we have less, or we have lower salaries, or we can't just rely on getting a salary. We have to go out and do stuff for ourselves. Sometimes it means you have less hierarchy and more interaction and flexibility. Other times, frankly, it'll mean the organizations will become more hierarchical and more top-down. So this is the changing nature of work. The Medallization of society is an idea of the efficiency of the bureaucratic system. So we call it the Medallization because it's based on an analysis of McDonald's Corporation. McDonald's, if you go to a McDonald's restaurant, I'm sure you've heard of one. Of course, there are a million copies, more or less, of McDonald's. You notice that what they do is they do a few things, and they try to do it in a way that is a little bit different than everybody else, but basically within the organization, the uniform, right? So the idea is to do things in a way that maximizes the efficiencies. Every McDonald's will have a standardized way of doing things that has been scientifically planned. So how do you get a burger and fries? You don't ask the guy and he figures it out by himself and designs a nice burger just for you. No, he's got basically a machine process he will go through that he has been trained to do and follow, right? And no matter if you're the President of the United States or the King of Barbados or a beggar who just happens to scrounge together $1.50 for a burger, he will give you the same burger, right? So it's basically a bureaucracy put on the front line. Uniformity, nothing is left to chance, everything is done in the same way. And control, right? Making sure that the people, the humans, are following the rules. And where possible, substituting humans for machines. Or rather, machines for humans, right? So that, for example, instead of a human at the cash register, people go up and they just input what they want, right? So that you just have a machine. Now, I'll tell you a secret here. That doesn't actually work because when people come out to a machine, the problem is they're not trained to deal with that machine, right? So it's actually not as efficient as a lot of people think it is, right? Because when you have a machine with a cashier, the cashier is trained to use the machine. This is why so often you go to the self-serve aisle in the supermarket or the self-serve machine in the McDonald's, and either you're stuck behind somebody who can't figure out what they're doing for hours, or you're there trying to figure out what the heck you're doing for hours, right? So sometimes getting rid of people altogether is not actually the right solution, but whatever. The point is these principles restrain the human creativity, choice, and freedom, as it were. So if you work at McDonald's, you're no longer free to make the hamburger any way you like. You've got to make it the way the system tells you to make it. Now, That goes along with Weber's argument that these rational systems increase efficiency but tend to be dehumanizing, right? But put it the other side of it, one advantage of McDonald's is any McDonald's you go to anywhere in the world, you know what you're going to get as a consumer, right? And you have the choice. I can always go to another place if I want, right? So as long as McDonald's is not the only chain of super burgers or whatever you want to call them, I don't really see how much problem there's personally. But a lot of people get very excited about this idea. So, I mean, what we're looking at is a future in which people with high levels of skills are probably going to find more creativity and freedom in their jobs. They're going to be higher up the hierarchy where they get to make decisions and have choices. People at the bottom, the less skilled you are, again, you're going to probably find yourself more subject to supervision and discipline within these organizations. But again, whether that's entirely new, I don't know. I mean, again, you would say the same thing about factory systems when they were organized. Obviously, the factory workers are just following a very few simple routines, and it was very dehumanizing. And that's where Marx actually originally got the concept of alienation from early industrialization 200 years ago. So people who are like saying this is all new, well, maybe it's not that new. Maybe these things come and go to a certain extent. Now, I did this model so we could see how everything that we've been discussing in this section fit together. So when you think about from individual level at the bottom to the social level at the top, right? For example, we can see how groups and organizations help integrate people into society. So for example, here you are, you're the individual. I'm going to draw a yellow line here. So here you are, you're the individual. And the closest things to you are going to be primary groups that you're a part of. So for example, your family, which will generally create inclusionary core values of when you're growing up and give you a sense of meaning when you're an adult perhaps. Friends also will do the same thing. So the peer groups as a child, when you're an adult, again, these local primary groups are going to be the core of who you think of yourself as. And then you have organizations. So, for example, you might have be a member of a political party. You might have obviously a workplace, place you go to work. You might serve in the military, just as an example. You might go to school or be a teacher. You might attend church. So each of these are different organizations you belong to. And so we're going from the informal now to the formal organizations. Within the formal organization also will be often where you find friends, right? Maybe sometimes family. You might end up marrying somebody in one of these organizations, right? And then the organizations are part of institutions. So the church is part of the institution of religion, which helps to regulate to some extent moral values. School is part of the institution of education, which helps to regulate social values. Military or your military unit is part of the broader military institution, which helps to protect the country, one might say, or according to Marxists, oppress the masses, and also creates discipline. The economy, obviously focused on production and consumption, and politics, focused on the social order. So this very much is more maybe a functionalist way of looking at things, because then, of course, at this point, all of these unite together to integrate you into society, right? So again, you could also look from the top down. So society, all these members, each member is going to be a member of a number of these different institutions, and then we'll filter down to the individual and their family and friends. So thank you very much for your attention. We've finished section 2, and now we're going to go on to section 3 after the midterm. Have fun.